Before I get into this video, do not forget to like and subscribe. I'm definitely going to be coming out with a lot more stuff. We're going to be talking about psychology, typology, social issues, probably some technology. Wherever it leads, wherever my studies in psychology lead me, I am going to talk about it. And I want you here to conversate with me. Eventually, I will be doing some podcasts, getting some guests on who are very highly educated professionals in their field. And I want to bring everybody along for this journey. So don't forget, like and subscribe, and let's get into this. All right, so a lot of people who have been following me for a while and are into personality type theory and psychology in general ask me the question about whether it is worth it to go to college for psychology. So my honest answer is yes, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. So psychology is still in its early stages as a science. And what this means is that it's full of challenges and it's also full of opportunity, which if you are the kind of person who thrives on fixing broken systems, it could work for you. In this video, I'm going to walk you through my experience in the field so far, what drew me into the field, what I've gained, and what I've seen go wrong, as well as how I think we can make it better. So when I decided to go to college for psychology, I brought with me a set of frameworks and questions that I had already developed to guide me through life. As many of you know, I'm naturally drawn to understanding how people think, how they learn, and what motivates them, and specifically how personality influences behavior. I didn't start going to school just to get a degree. I came to school because I care about these problems and I want to be a part of the solution. And in many ways, it has been a great decision. So right now I work in the SCAN lab, Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience lab. We study things like reward, anticipation, learning, emotional and social processing, and decision-making. And a lot of our work focuses on people with subclinical traits of either schizophrenia or autism. And we work with populations who are at clinically high risk for psychosis. One of my biggest interests, what excites me most, is exploring how emerging technologies and AI can be used for things like early diagnosis and intervention, especially in these populations who are at clinical high risk. And I do think that this type of research can change lives. So being in this lab is a really exciting role for me because I get to spend a lot of time doing hands-on research, but also because I'm constantly sharpening my programming skills. One of my main responsibilities in the lab is building the experiments that we run in our studies. And I think it's kind of rare to find this type of environment on a college campus. You have to actively search for it. Additionally, beyond psychology, my minor is in applications of artificial intelligence, and I use that a lot in my lab work. But I've also been developing independent research that looks at how personality traits influence attitudes towards artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence, while exploring for the SCAN lab how AI can be used as a tool for early intervention and diagnosis. I do plan on continuing this line of research into grad school, which I'm actually applying for this month. Outside the lab, I stay pretty active. I'm part of the Combat Robotics Club, so that allows me to apply my programming skills in a very hands-on and competitive way. I'm also a member of Turning Point USA, so that gives me some space to discuss hard topics, challenge my thinking, and learn how to articulate my views a little bit more clearly. Between research, coding, real-world debate, I'm constantly learning, and that's what makes this experience so valuable. So overall, my experience gaining research and learning more about the field has been great. But if I do zoom out a little bit beyond the lab, more into the classroom, my experience in psychology and the social sciences in general has opened my eyes to some emerging ideas that many, including myself, may find concerning. This isn't just the science itself, but the state of the field as a whole. I've seen firsthand the potential academic psychology has, and also some of its most troubling limitations, especially in how it handles bias, identity, and scientific rigor. For anyone who has been following my channel for a while, you already know I'm going to give you some frameworks to think about as I lay out these problems. This really does matter because without enough information, it's easy to overlook how serious some of these issues really are. So here are a few foundational ideas from some of the greatest thinkers I think are worth keeping in mind. First, obviously, Carl Jung. Carl Jung did warn us about isms, racism, sexism, and ageism, as well as the many more that there could be. He believed we should transcend these categories and not create more of them. So just keep that in mind throughout this video because we are going to get into these topics. Today in modern academia, it does seem that we're doing the opposite. We're multiplying isms instead of moving past them. Again, another great thinker, Jordan Peterson, he says that we experience the world through a narrative. And I think this is really important to understand when you're thinking about people being educated within a system. What this education is doing is helping people form a narrative. And then we can go even farther back into time to one of the greatest thinkers, Aristotle, who argued that our understanding of reality comes through repetition and association. So if we combine the ideas of Jordan Peterson and Aristotle, we understand that as we continue learning in school, we're doing the repetitions, we're making the associations, and we are forming a narrative. Though this may not be so explicit, what I'm going to share is some implicit things that are occurring that I think are forming the way young people are interpreting the world. And I just question whether these narratives we keep repeating are based on a solid foundation or not. I'm going to leave it up to you guys to decide. I'm going to share with you some of the ones I question, some of the topics or ideas, the constructs that I question. But to be honest, I do think that the result of some of these ideas is real division in society. And I think academia is playing a major role in amplifying and reinforcing the divides. One thing I will say is in some of my social sciences class that aren't so scientifically rigorous, there often are opinions that are addressed, presented as fact or as validated claims through research, though many times they are opinions, and I do have to speak up in class to address the dangers of these opinions that are not validated or backed by a rigorous scientific process. I think to understand how things are working in academia, we have to go back to the beginning of psychology. The early days of psychology was dominated by people like Freud, Jung, Adler, and Nietzsche. They were deep thinkers and highly intuitive. They were focused on building constructs. So just so everybody knows, constructs are concepts you can't directly observe, but that help explain patterns and behaviors. So some constructs could be like personality type. Jung came up with the idea of cognitive functions. Though we can't ever really touch a cognitive function, we can understand that there are things that, there are patterns occurring that allow for a cognitive function to be identified. Intelligence was an early construct. Traits, now we have the big five, but traits have been around for a while. We have things like grit, locus of control, so internal or external circumstances that affect you. What is your belief on that? Motivation, we got more constructs about like developmental stages from Erickson and Piaget. So this might look at constructs of childhood. Then you also get like in abnormal psych, you get constructs like psychological disorders and mental illness. These constructs, in order to be accepted, they need to be tested for validity and reliability, because their goal of using these constructs is to make findings that can be replicated, generalized, and used to predict outcomes. So what validity means is that when we have a construct, we define it, we give it an operational definition, and that what the construct claims to measure is what it is actually measuring. So if you were claiming the construct of intelligence and you were measuring happiness, they would not be the exact same thing. So then we can get into reliability. So once something has been validated, it must be validated first. It must show that it is measuring the thing that it is measuring or claiming to measure. Then we check it for reliability. What this would look like is inter-rater reliability. Can two clinical psychologists see the same construct and agree that it is the same construct? Beyond that, you would get retest reliability. So if I test you now, will you test the same later on? And then within this, because it's often in the form of a survey, you make sure that each item within the survey is also valid and reliable. You check for internal consistency. Sometimes you might find that one question within that scale doesn't meet the standards, so you would find a way to remove that question and then redo the analysis. With these early thinkers, you often do get criticisms from modern academics and teachers, often because they are female. They do criticize these constructs for being developed by old white men, quote, I am quoting that, but the truth is they still do hold up. Even the Oedipal complex and things like that. How you were raised as a child will affect you into adulthood, though a lot of people don't like the people who came up with these ideas. More importantly, a lot of these constructs were rooted in the individual, not groups, which I think is very important. As somebody who really focuses on the psychology more so than the sociology, I believe allowing people to use their psychology as a tool to get them to where they want to be is what we should be looking at. Regardless of circumstance, you would think that. So when we're looking at groups rather than individual, I think that's when the bad comes around, because I think to do that, you kind of actually have to move academia from an area of intuition and thinking to an area of sensing and feeling, which if we fast forward to today, that's where we're at. Right now, psychology does face what is called a replication crisis, primarily in social psychology. These areas of psychology that try to say a lot of the outcomes are based on external circumstances, environment, or nurture. And what we're finding now is that many studies that for the past 20 or 30 years have been claimed to be foundational cannot be replicated, but they are still taught as truth within the classroom. This isn't just a niche problem for scientific journals. It actually affects what is taught in classrooms, how policies are made, and how people view science. One thing I will say is that in the classroom, they often say that policy affects the social construct, but they leave out the idea that new social constructs will affect policy. And at the same time, while we are doing this, we've shifted from measuring individual traits to inventing and promoting more social constructs, which is why we see a minimum of 3 gender categories on almost any psychological survey that is being used for a study. So what we call the new constructs, they are going to be considered social constructs, not psychological constructs. Social constructs are ideas that only exist because we agree on them. They're not tied to an observable mechanism or physical basis most of the time, or at least that's the claim. So let's just go over a couple of them. Race is considered a social construct, that there's no biological mechanism for race. Gender identity and gender expression, as well as gender itself. Stress, because with stress you can factor in different social factors that contribute to stress. So with a stress scale, you may add in, do you find yourself not having enough time to complete what you need to complete? It's related to your social context. Socioeconomic status, which includes education, occupation, and I believe income. Those are 3 factors that get put into that construct. Marriage status or family roles, and nationality, ethnicity, things like that. These constructs are seen as subjective. So often with these demographic questions on a survey, you're going to see check all that apply. They're measured through self-report, experience, or identity. And the narrative being told is that your life outcomes are the result of bias and prejudice against these social groups, whichever one you identify with. They're not based on traits like grit, conscientiousness, or intelligence, which have all been shown to have a significant impact on life outcomes. Rather, people would pay attention to where you fall within these social categories. Why is that a problem? It does get really dangerous. We've started to actually erase clinical labels for psychological disorders, claiming that there is a stigma and bias against certain personality characteristics rather than saying that there are people who deviate from the norm. So what I see being taught in school is this idea of implicit bias. Basically, in psychology, it's accepted that most people don't have an explicit bias and are not explicitly racist the way they were in the past. So they needed to come up with another way to divide people. They decided, oh, well, there's probably implicit bias. And the ways that they go about trying to demonstrate this probably are very invalid and unreliable, definitely unreliable. They don't repeat in follow-up studies. But the reason that I would say even invalid, I don't think that implicit bias exists in the way that they claim. Just for example, one implicit association test is they have babies as young as 6 months old stare at somebody, and the person that they're staring in is going to be controlled for their race. So if they're a white baby, they're going to stare at a white person, and then following that, they might stare at a black person. And what they find is that a white baby is more likely to stare at a white person for a longer period of time. And they say that this is because babies as young as 6 months old have implicit bias. And which then translates to that they have some form of racism that's basically innate to who they are. What I do argue here is that this construct of implicit bias is not well enough defined. If you find the research, you will see it is more just an opinion, and it likely reflects, even if the child is staring at their own race for a longer period of time, it likely reflects a child's preference for familiarity, which is a safety mechanism, probably encoded into our DNA. You know, that's my father, that's my mother, that's who I want to be with, especially at 6 months old. It's not uncommon. And more recent studies do show that this is actually a developmental stage, that as babies get a little bit older, they're more likely to start finding interest in people who are less like them, once they probably feel safe within the world that they're existing in, right? And in my own experience, the reason this is so dangerous is because of something that happened after we spent 3 weeks learning about implicit bias and all the ways that white people are biased towards black people. And I'm just going to be honest, this isn't just a problem for white people. This is a problem for black people. It is basically making black people feel inferior. And this circumstance that came up, I'm going to share with you. So we learned about this topic for 3 weeks in the beginning of the semester. Then following that topic, we moved on to the topic of transgenderism. And we were discussing transgenderism. Somebody brought up the question of, like, at what age do you think that it's okay to let somebody transition from male to female or female to male? And basically, one person in the class got upset, and it turned into her calling another person in the class racist, which had nothing to do with the topic, but we had just spent 3 weeks talking about implicit bias, so that was in her head. As we go back to Aristotle and Jordan Peterson, she made associations of white people as being biased towards her. She created that narrative, and that was expressed, and my teacher was shocked about it. I ended up writing about it in a later paper, and I actually have a meeting with my teacher now, coming up on Monday, because she doesn't like what I wrote, but I did say that I think a lot of the topics that are being discussed have no evidence for them, and all they're really doing is creating a divide between people. It was demonstrated clearly within the class. And beyond the classroom, these go into HR departments and our laws. So, you know, if we are teaching people that this hate exists between people, without using reliable, valid studies, we're just creating a divide that has no actual need to exist. But I do have a solution to these types of problems. And as most of you know, I went to school for psychology because my original interest was type. And I want to move forward in the world. I want to move forward without worrying about myself, my son, your kids being called a racist. If you are black, I don't want your kids to feel inferior to me in any way. I want them to have all the opportunity in the world. And I want it to be based on, you know, who we are internally as our minds work and operate. So my proposal is to include type preference as a demographic variable. It's not controversial. It is measurable more so than an endless number of genders. Though what I do see is many people in academia will laugh at me the minute I bring it up. They laugh at the idea of personality type while fully embracing other subjective identity constructs that many people cannot get on board with. And to me, it's a double standard. It's costing us clarity, unity, and scientific integrity. And I think it's worth trying to do because psychology does have massive potential, and we need to stop pretending it's farther than it really is. We need to return to solid constructs. We need to ensure reliability. We need to value the individual, as I've always said, and not reduce them to a checkbox on a diversity form. Bringing science back to the rigor it was once at requires us to have courage and ask uncomfortable questions because that's what real science demands. And if you're somebody who's up for that challenge, then I would say it's worth going to college for psychology. But go in with your eyes open because the field needs people who are willing to do better. And that's what I got for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you are interested in following me on this journey of the mind. I've been on this journey for a long time. I am really starting to see some of the things that I've done in the past start to play out. Even when I'm making this video, I look back to 3 years ago when I was talking about the idea of bringing my skills from typology and my passion for learning programming into an academic environment. Somehow I ended up there, and I continue to keep going, and I just want to bring people along with me. I want to encourage you guys to put yourself out there and do what you can. So make sure you subscribe so that you can follow along. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next episode.